she saw someone sitting in her back seat. Doors were locked, windows up. She'd been driving alone for 2 hours. A CB radio voice predicted a fatal accident 4 minutes before it happened, named the victim, described injuries that hadn't occurred yet. Everyone at the rest stop had the same symbol carved into their skin, and they were all staring at one woman who just wanted coffee. A driver passed the same gas station 23 times in a straight line on an empty highway, trapped in a loop that defied every law of physics. 4 true highway horror stories from 4 different drivers who barely made it home alive. Hit subscribe right now, because what happens at 1942 in Story 2 will make you check your rearview mirror every 30 seconds for the rest of your life. Story 1. The Backseat Passenger. Sarah Mitchell's eyes locked onto the rearview mirror at 2:47 a.m. and her heart stopped as she saw a woman sitting in her back seat, skin pale, eyes hollow, hair plastered to a blood-soaked hospital gown, despite the fact that Sarah had been driving alone for 3 hours with the doors locked and the windows up. For a few frozen seconds, she couldn't even scream. The only sound in the car was the wiper blades smearing mist across the windshield and the faint rattle of something loose in the trunk. And as the woman's gaze lifted to meet hers in the mirror, Sarah realized with a nauseating lurch that the face staring back at her wasn't a stranger's at all. It was the face of her daughter Emma, who had died on this exact highway 2 years earlier in a late-night collision Sarah had never forgiven herself for. 6 hours earlier, the night had felt almost normal. Just another double shift at the Portland hospital. Another exhausted clock out at midnight and the familiar 40-mile drive down Route 77 in her sputtering sedan. The same podcast humming low on the speakers, the same green exit signs she could have named with her eyes closed. But somewhere after mile marker 29, the air in the car turned wrong, dropping from summer warm to freezer cold in a single breath, fog thickening outside until the road vanished beyond her headlights, and her breath ghosted in front of her face as if she'd stepped into a walk-in cooler. She'd blamed it on fatigue at first, the way the radio slipped into static, the faint whisper she thought she heard from the back seat, the phantom smell of antiseptic and burnt rubber that didn't belong in her car. But when she adjusted the mirror and saw that impossible figure sitting directly behind her headrest, so close that if she'd reached back she could have touched the damp fabric of the gown, every rational explanation fell away and left only animal terror. She slammed the brakes, the car fishtailing for a heartbeat before gripping the wet asphalt, and twisted around in her seat with her heart battering her ribs, expecting to see the woman lunging at her. Instead, the back seat was empty, just a crumpled fast food bag and her canvas work tote slumped against the door, shadows pooling harmlessly where a second before a body had been. And she sat there in the middle of the highway, shaking so hard her teeth clicked, telling herself out loud that she was hallucinating, that sleep deprivation could make people see things that weren't there. When she forced herself to start driving again, creeping forward at 40 instead of the usual 65, the road felt like a tunnel, and the night felt like it was leaning in. And though she promised herself she wouldn't look at the mirror, her eyes kept flicking up in nervous, jittery glances until on the 4th or 5th pass the woman was simply there again. No movement, no sound, no transition. Sitting upright with her hands folded in her lap, head slightly tilted, eyes now wet with red-tinged tears that traced glistening lines down gray skin. This time, before Sarah could stop herself, her foot stamped the brake only halfway and hovered, because the woman's mouth had started to move, and the voice that came out of her, soft, shaking, threaded with a familiarity that made Sarah's bones ache, wasn't some guttural demon rasp, but Emma's voice, exactly as it had sounded on the voicemail Sarah still replayed on bad nights, only thinner, like it was traveling through too much cold air. "Mom," the thing in the back seat whispered, and hearing that word broke whatever defenses Sarah had left. Her throat closed, her eyes filled, and she croaked out, No, no, you're not real. Even as her knuckles whitened around the steering wheel and the needle on the speedometer crept back up toward 60 almost on its own. The woman, Emma, not Emma, lifted one trembling hand and pointed through the windshield toward the darkness ahead. Past the curtain of fog where the road curved under an overpass Sarah knew too well, and in a voice that wavered like a detuned radio, she said, 3 miles ahead at 3:02, a truck is going to lose its load on the overpass. If you're under it when it falls, you won't wake up, Mom. Please, you have to slow down. I couldn't save myself, but I can save you. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2:59 a.m. The green numerals unnaturally bright mile marker 31 flashed by on the right. And for a long, suspended heartbeat, Sarah balanced between clinging to the sanity that insisted this was grief and exhaustion playing tricks on her and surrendering to the sheer, choking fear that told her to listen to the ghost of her child no matter how impossible it was. In the end, her body made the choice for her, her foot easing down onto the brake, the car bleeding speed until the needle hovered at 25 as the looming shape of the overpass materialized through the fog like a concrete jaw waiting to snap shut. The air felt denser as she crept under it, every nerve in her body braced for humiliation. Nothing would happen. She'd prove herself crazy. She'd have to admit she believed in her own hallucination. But instead, right as the clock on the dash ticked to 3:02, there was a scream of air brakes above, a metallic shriek that split the night, and Sarah watched in stunned horror as a semi-truck jackknifed on the overpass, its trailer swinging sideways like a wrecking ball, the straps holding its cargo snapping in quick, vicious pops until several multi-ton steel beams tore free and plunged off the overpass to obliterate the patch of highway she would have been occupying if she'd kept going 70. The impact shook her car, windshield spiderwebbing with small cracks from the shockwave of debris and flying gravel, and for a second she could only stare at the mangled ruin of pavement 30 feet ahead. Lights from the now skewed truck overhead strobing through the fog like some hellish emergency beacon, while the part of her mind that still believed in coincidental timing shriveled and died. When she finally tore her gaze from the destruction to the rearview mirror, the back seat was empty again. No trace of blood, no hospital gown. But lying neatly centered on the seat was a thin plastic hospital bracelet with Emma Mitchell printed on it, the exact one that had been cut from her daughter's wrist the night of the accident, and which Sarah had lost months ago, its plastic warm as if it had just been worn. Tucked under it, folded with impossible care, was a small scrap of paper in Emma's familiar loopy handwriting that read, "I love you, Mom. Slow down." Later, when the police arrived and found a traumatized nurse crying beside a car that should have been crushed flat, they assumed shock, called for paramedics, and humored her when she begged them to review her dashcam footage. The same footage that, once played, showed a pale woman appearing and disappearing in the back seat, talking to an unseen driver pointing at the overpass just before the truck lost control. Audio capturing a young girl's quavering voice warning her mother to reduce speed. The official report filed that night mentioned only evasive driving and possible prior knowledge of road conditions, the dashcam files quietly removed to some higher-up server. But among the local highway patrol officers, the story spread in hushed fragments. That a dead girl in a blood-stained gown had been seen in multiple vehicles on Route 77 at night, always in the back seat, always pointing toward danger ahead. That 7 separate near-fatal accidents had been averted in the past 2 years by drivers who all described the same face, the same voice, the same impossible cold in the air just before the worst should have happened. Truckers started joking nervously about getting the Mitchell ride along, some claiming they'd feel a sudden chill and see a small figure in their mirror before coming upon a wreck they had just enough time to avoid. And though no one could prove it, more and more people began to say that Emma hadn't stayed in the grave they'd put her in. She'd stayed on the asphalt that killed her, riding silently in back seats up and down Route 77. trading her own unfinished life for a chance to make sure that other parents, other daughters, never had to see the highway the way she did in her final seconds. Story 2. The Static Voice. Marcus Rivera was 3 hours deep into the Nevada night when his CB radio spoke his full name in a voice he had never heard before, calm and precise, like it was reading his life off a screen. Marcus Antonio Rivera, 42 years old, truck number TC4187, hauling electronics from Sacramento to Denver. He almost dropped his coffee, glancing at the silent highway on either side as if someone might step out of the darkness holding a microphone. But there was nobody. Just the endless stretch of Interstate 80, desert on both sides, and the soft hum of his engine. Before he could reach for the CB to bark back a curse, the voice continued. In 4 minutes and 38 seconds, you are going to see a silver Honda Civic spin out at mile marker 167. The driver's name is Jennifer Kwan, 29 years old, 2 daughters at home. In 4 minutes and 37 seconds, Jennifer dies, unless you do exactly what I tell you. The words were too specific to be a prank, too fast to be improvised, and though Marcus's first instinct was to tell whoever it was to go to hell, his eyes dropped to the digital clock on his dash. 1:14 a.m., and he found himself easing his foot off the throttle instead. He'd been running the loneliest stretch of I-80 for almost 2 decades, knew every curve and rest stop and mile marker like the lines on his own hands, and he'd heard some creepy things on the CB before. Drunk truckers, cruel jokes, even the occasional ghost story. But nothing like this. Nothing that made his scalp prickle with the feeling that something was standing just behind him in the cab, watching through his eyes. He grabbed the mic anyway because habit was stronger than fear. "Cute trick," he growled, trying to keep his voice steady. "Who is this and how do you know my name?" The reply was instant, without a hint of laughter. 3 minutes and 52 seconds. You are currently traveling 63 miles per hour. You need to be traveling 74. Move into the left lane and accelerate, Marcus. You must be alongside the Civic when her front left tire ruptures at 1:18:52 a.m. If you are behind her, she crosses the center line and collides head-on with truck number RJ9021. Both drivers die. 2 daughters lose their mother. The air in the cab felt thinner, his throat drier, but his right foot pressed down anyway, needle climbing past 70 as the engine growled. For all his disbelief, there was a weight in that voice, a total lack of doubt that wormed past his skepticism and settled in the part of him that had seen too many crumpled cars on the shoulder. Too many white sheets on stretchers under emergency lights. If this was a twisted joke, it was the cruelest one he'd ever heard. Mile marker 164 flashed by. He checked his side mirror and saw only his own trailer lights stretching back into the dark. No prankster tailing him, no convoy lurking just out of sight. Just him, the desert, and a voice that knew too much. 2 minutes later, he saw the Civic, a small silver shape in the right lane doing a steady 65, its taillights glowing faintly through the heat ripples rising off the asphalt. Marcus swallowed. "I see her," he muttered into the mic. "If this is a setup, I swear." The voice cut him off. 60 seconds, move into the left lane and match her speed. Do not attempt to pass. When the tire blows, she will jerk left into your lane. You must already be there to block her path across the median. His palms were slick on the wheel as he signaled and eased into the left lane, drawing parallel with the little car. He could see the woman now through the side window, a tired face lit by dashboard glow, one hand on the wheel, the other absently rubbing at her neck. She didn't look like someone about to die. She looked like every overworked, under-rested driver on the road at that hour. He wanted to lean on his horn to warn her, to tell her to pull over, but something in him feared that breaking the pattern might shatter whatever fragile thread he was following. The voice counted down, steady as a metronome. 10 seconds, 9, 8. Marcus held his breath. 7, 6, 5. His eyes flicked to the clock. 1:18:47. 4:32. The sound when the tire blew was like a shotgun going off under his feet. The Civic's front left wheel exploded, rubber shredding, the rim sparking as it dug into the pavement. The car jerked hard left, the woman's scream a brief, high-pitched echo he heard even over his engine, and if Marcus hadn't already been there, if his 20-ton rig hadn't been occupying the space she tried to swerve into, she would have shot across the median into the invisible path of some oncoming trucker he couldn't see. Instead, her Civic slammed sideways into the side of his trailer with a grinding crunch, bounced and spun back into the right lane, spinning twice before coming to rest at an angle on the shoulder, smoking but intact. Marcus felt the jolt shudder up through the chassis, fought the wheel until he was sure his own truck wasn't going to tip, then hit his hazards and dragged the whole rig onto the shoulder in a long, shuddering slide that left his heart pounding in his throat. For a second, the highway fell eerily silent again, just the tick of cooling metal and the distant hiss of wind over rocks. Then the voice returned, as calm as ever. Impact avoided. Jennifer Kwan alive. Truck RJ9021 passes unharmed in 45 seconds. As if on cue, a set of headlights crested the distant rise, a big rig thundering westbound in the opposite lanes, oblivious to the alternate future it had almost intersected. Marcus didn't answer the radio. He was already out of his cab, boots hitting gravel as he ran toward the shattered Civic. The driver's door creaked open and the woman stumbled out, shaking, eyes wild. I lost control," she stammered. "I don't know what. Did I hit you? Oh my God, I'm so sorry, Her gaze swept the road, took in the gouges in the asphalt, the distance between her car and the median, the faint trace of headlights receding westbound. "I should be dead," she whispered, and then she was clinging to him, sobbing into his vest, asking the question he'd been dreading. "How did you know? Why were you right there?" He didn't have an answer that would sound sane, so he told her the one that was true. "The radio told me." She thought he was making a bad joke until he coaxed her to sit in his passenger seat and rewound the dashcam audio for her. The voice played back clearly. Her name, her daughter's, the exact timing of the blowout. And Jennifer went ashen, one hand pressed to her mouth as she listened to someone who wasn't in the cab narrate the near future like it was old news. When the trooper arrived, called by Jennifer as soon as her hand stopped shaking enough to dial, Marcus told the story again, this time bracing for the professional skepticism. The officer's face was hard to read. He inspected the shredded tire, hummed about manufacturing defects and lucky positioning, took Marcus's statement, and finally asked if he had any alcohol in his system. Marcus, insulted, offered to blow into anything they liked. Only when the trooper sat in the cab alone and listened to the dashcam audio did his expression crack. Marcus saw it through the windshield, the stiffening of shoulders, the way the officer's eyes flicked to the dead CB unit, as if expecting it to speak up on its own. "I'll need a copy of this," the trooper said quietly when he stepped back out, and that was the end of any joking tone. Jennifer was loaded into an ambulance as a precaution, her cracked ribs and minor concussion nothing compared to what could have happened. Marcus watched her go, still hearing the voice in his head counting down to catastrophe. He thought that was the end of it, one impossible night, one bizarre save, something he'd eventually chalk up to fate and try not to pick it too hard. But 10 minutes after the ambulance pulled away and the trooper finished the paperwork, the CB crackled again with that same steady tone. "Next target, Michael Torres, black Ford F-150, traveling eastbound on Highway 50 near Fallon. Steering column failure projected in 17 minutes. Single vehicle rollover fatality without intervention," it said, like it was reading weather reports. Marcus, sitting in his idling cab with both hands flat on his knees, stared at the radio as a chill rolled through him deeper than the desert night. "No," he whispered. "Find someone else." The answer came immediately. You are within range. You have time. You have the necessary mass and experience. Michael Torres has 3 children, 11 minutes to decision point. The casual mention of children twisted something in his chest. He knew Highway 50, the so-called loneliest road in America, knew how long it could take for help to arrive out there if something went wrong. He also knew that if what had happened with Jennifer was more than a fluke, if this thing on the other end of the CB really could see what was coming, then saying no was the same as choosing not to brake when someone stepped into the crosswalk. So he didn't say no. He changed course, merging onto the nearest connector that would take him toward Highway 50. The voice feeding him turn-by-turn routes with the bored accuracy of a navigation system. It told him where to push his speed, when to back off to avoid patrol cars, how to time his arrival to intersect with the moment Michael's steering column would seize. As the miles unspooled beneath him in an anxious blur, Marcus tested the boundaries of his strange benefactor with clipped questions. "What are you?" he asked once, knuckles white around the mic. "Are you a person?" The answer was not comforting. "Not in any way you would recognize," the voice said. "Think of me as surveillance, pattern recognition, intervention protocol. I observe data streams you cannot see. GPS anomalies, mechanical stress signatures, driver bios, weather patterns, probability forecasts. I am authorized to reduce preventable fatalities within defined corridors." The words sounded like a mission statement, not like anything divine or demonic, but the effect was eerie all the same. Like talking to a traffic god marinated in corporate jargon. "Why me?" he asked. "Why not just call them directly? Call 911, hell, call their phone." Static crackled for a beat, and then, "Most do not listen to warnings from nowhere. You, however, responded to improbable instruction and executed it successfully. You are statistically more likely to comply again. 7 minutes. By dawn, Marcus had helped steer a pickup off the road just before its steering locked, paced a minivan down a mountain grade while its brakes burned and failed near the bottom, and physically blocked a sleepy teenager's sedan from drifting across the center line by nudging it with his trailer until the kid woke up screaming. Each time the voice provided names, ages, the ugly little details about who was waiting at home that made it impossible for Marcus to turn away. Each time it narrated the failure to come with deadpan accuracy, then adjusted its instructions when real-world variables shifted. A gust of wind, an unexpected pothole, a deer. When the first wash of pale morning light finally rolled over the desert, painting the sky in thin streaks of color, the CB went quiet mid-sentence, cutting itself off as if someone had flipped a switch. Marcus waited for it to return. It didn't. The silence was louder than any static. He delivered his beaten-up rig late, told his dispatcher there'd been a situation, and spent the next off-duty stretch, replaying the dashcam footage until his laptop battery died. Eventually, curiosity and a gnawing sense of duty shoved him toward the nearest state patrol office, where he handed over copies of the recordings and tried to explain without sounding like he'd lost his mind. Some officers looked at him like he was crazy. Others, the older ones with lines cut deep around their eyes, listened quietly, traded glances, and said less than they knew. Weeks later, through the truck stop grapevine, Marcus heard that similar recordings had surfaced in other states. Different drivers, different highways, the same eerie voice predicting tragedy with machine-like calm. Some drivers ignored it and found out later there had indeed been a wreck where it said there would be. Others listened and ended up in stories told in half-whispers over lukewarm coffee. Stories about a presence on the CB that wasn't quite human but wasn't an angel either. Something watching the thin lines of light crawling down the map in the dark. On bad nights when the road ahead seemed to go on forever and the loneliness pressed hard against the windows, Marcus would find himself flicking through channels, pausing in the static as if he might hear that flat tone slip through at any moment. Sometimes his hand hovered over the switch that would turn the radio off for good. The idea of never hearing it again, both relief and terror. More often he left it on. Somewhere out there were people who would go into ditches and medians and under guardrails with no one to see them coming. No one to yank them back from the second before impact. Somewhere out there was a voice that could see the crash before the first skid mark appeared, hunting for someone stubborn and soft-hearted enough to follow orders when the clock hit 10 seconds. Whether it was man, machine, ghost, or some ugly hybrid of all three, Marcus didn't know. He only knew that one night on I-80, when the CB spoke in his ear and told him exactly how a stranger would die, he'd done what it said. And because of that, a woman named Jennifer went home to her daughters instead of to a morgue, and a quiet, impossible pattern started to write itself into the dark spaces between mile markers, carried on a band of radio waves no one could trace. Story 3. The Rest Stop Ritual. By the time Jasmine Rodriguez realized every single person at the rest stop had the same symbol on their skin, it was already too late to pretend any of it was normal. 11 of them stood between her and the highway, spaced in a loose circle around her stalled car, each bearing a small black mark, a circle with 7 lines radiating outward, inked on a wrist, a neck, a forearm, or, in the case of the woman from the bathroom, carved freshly and crudely into the flesh so that beads of dark blood still clung to the grooves. She'd only meant to stop for 5 minutes on her late-night drive from Atlanta to Savannah, a quick bathroom break and a caffeine hit after the car's AC had died somewhere past Macon and turned the interior into a humid oven. At 3 a.m., the sign for the County 441 Scenic Rest Area, next right, had felt like a small miracle, a rectangle of light in the middle of the empty Georgia dark. From the highway, the place had looked like any other forgotten stop. A low concrete building with buzzing fluorescents, 2 vending machines humming by the entrance, a scattering of parked vehicles, an aging pickup, a tan sedan, a semi-idling on the far side, and a row of sodium lamps casting that sickly orange glow over cracked pavement and weed-choked curbs. The air had smelled like hot asphalt and pine sap. Inside, though, it had been wrong in a way she couldn't articulate at first. The bathroom tiles were too clean, gleaming under the harsh lights without a single scuff or smear, the mirrors spotless, the stalls untagged and graffiti-free like they belonged in a hospital brochure instead of a roadside toilet. And under the citrus-sharp tang of industrial cleaner was a faint, metallic note that made her think of blood and rust. It was only when she ducked into the nearest stall and shut the door that she saw the symbol, etched into the paint at eye level. A circle with 7 lines like a child's drawing of a sun, cut so deep into the metal you could feel the grooves under your fingertips. When she finished and stepped back out, she noticed it again on the next stall door, then above the sinks, then on the paper towel dispenser, always the same crude design, repeated with obsessive care as if someone had come in with a knife and hours to spare. She'd been unnerved but not terrified then, telling herself it was some local gang sign or bored teen ritual, and forced herself to wash her hands, staring at her tired reflection as the faucet hissed. The first woman with the symbol had walked in as Jasmine was reaching for a paper towel. A tall, thin lady in a faded sundress, bare arms freckled, her hair pulled back in a loose bun. And when she turned to offer a polite nod, Jasmine saw the mark carved into the inside of her forearm. Not inked, but cut. The same circle and 7 lines. The surrounding skin inflamed and shiny. The center of each line still weeping diluted blood that had dried in marbled streaks down her wrist. The woman moved like it didn't hurt at all. She caught Jasmine staring, tilted her head and smiled with lips that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Long night?" she asked, voice too bright for the hour. Jasmine muttered something about a wedding, grabbed her things and hurried out, goosebumps rising on her arms despite the heat. The lobby area of the rest stop, a small square room with vending machines, a dead potted plant, and a counter that might once have held maps and brochures, had been occupied now by two more people she hadn't seen when she arrived. A heavy-set man in a trucker cap sipping coffee from a styrofoam cup. A teenager in a college hoodie leaning against the wall, scrolling on his phone. Both glanced up when she entered. Both smiled that same thin, polite smile. Both had the symbol visible, the man's on the side of his neck, the kid's on the back of his hand in dark, crisp ink. It was only then that the hair on the back of her neck really started to rise. One or two matching tattoos could be coincidence, but four, all identical, all at a deserted rest stop at nearly 4 in the morning on a random county road, felt like walking into a uniform she hadn't been given. She pushed through the heavy glass door and gulped night air like she'd been underwater, focusing on the orange glow of her Honda Civic parked under the nearest light. The lot seemed more crowded now. She counted the original pickup and sedan, the semi, plus a dark SUV she hadn't noticed pulling in, and some of the people she'd seen inside were now outside, leaning against cars, smoking, talking in low voices that stopped when she stepped onto the concrete. Every pair of eyes turned to her for a fraction of a second before drifting away as if by some unspoken rule. Her skin crawled. She quickened her pace, the gravel crunching too loud under her sneakers. When she slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, she felt that brief, foolish flood of relief that always comes from being back inside your own metal box. Thin doors suddenly feeling like walls. She jammed the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine rolled once, coughed, and died. She tried again. Nothing. A dull click and a dead, heavy silence. The dash lights flickered, then went dark. Her heart sank. The car had been running fine all day. She'd filled the tank just outside Atlanta. The battery was only a year old. There'd been no warning signs. Hands trembling now, she popped the hood and climbed back out, forcing herself not to look at the cluster of people near the building who seemed, she could have sworn, to have edged closer without actually appearing to move. Under the hood, the problem was not subtle. Both battery terminals were bare, the cables that should have been clamped onto them hanging neatly down, their ends clean, not corroded, not snapped, removed. Someone had opened her hood while she was in the bathroom and carefully disconnected her battery, then closed it again like nothing had happened. Jasmine's mouth went dry. She hadn't been in there for more than 5 minutes. 5 minutes was enough, apparently, for 11 strangers with matching marks to make sure she wasn't going anywhere. She shut the hood slowly and turned back toward the building. The group was closer now, spaced casually between her and the rest stop entrance. Some leaning on cars, some standing with hands in pockets, all watching her with that same gauzy pleasantness. The cashier, a lean man in a polo shirt with no logo, who she could have sworn wasn't behind the counter when she first arrived, stepped forward with an expression that might have been concern if his eyes hadn't been so flat. "Car trouble?" he called, as if they hadn't just sabotaged her. Instinct screamed at her to lie, to pretend everything was fine, to get her back against something solid and her phone in her hand. But when she glanced at her screen, it showed no service where the bars should be, even though she'd had full coverage less than 10 miles back on the highway. "It's dead," she heard herself say anyway, voice too thin. "Battery, I think." The cashier nodded sympathetically. "Happens out here. Temperature swings, humidity. We can help you jump it. Just come back inside, sit down, have a coffee while we get everything ready. We take care of people who stop here." All the while, that symbol was staring up at her from his wrist as he gestured, the thin black circle and 7 lines flexing over tendons. She took a step backward instead of forward. Someone behind her shifted, the shuffle of shoes on gravel behind her car. When she glanced back, 2 of the group had drifted to stand behind her trunk, effectively hemming her in. The heaviness in her chest finally tipped over into full-blown panic. She did the only thing her body would allow in that moment. She ran, not toward the building, not toward her car, but sideways, toward the dark tree line beyond the far edge of the lot where the sodium light faded into tangled shadow. Branches slapped her arms and face as she plunged without grace into the brush, tearing through spider webs, snapping twigs, heart thundering, the rational part of her brain noting how stupid it was to run blindly into the woods at night, and the animal part not caring at all. She expected them to sprint after her, to crash through the undergrowth, to grab her from behind. But the only sounds that followed were the crunch and shift of coordinated footsteps that stopped just short of the tree line. No voices, no shouts, as if they knew the woods were already doing their work for them. She didn't stop until her lungs burned and her legs wobbled, and when she finally slowed, chest heaving, she found herself at the top of a slight incline, looking down at something that shouldn't have been there. A slab of concrete set into the earth like the roof of a buried bunker, with a metal door in the center and a short flight of steps leading down, half swallowed by leaves and soil. There was no reason for a basement in the middle of nowhere behind a rest stop, but there it was, a rectangle of darkness framed by crumbling concrete, the door slightly ajar and a faint orange light seeping out from below like the glow of a distant fire. On the pillar beside the door, someone had painted the circle in 7 lines again, larger this time, each line thick and dark, the whole thing ringed with smaller symbols she couldn't read. Every horror movie she'd ever seen lined up in her head and screamed, "Don't go down there." But behind her, further up the slope, she could hear the soft, deliberate tread of multiple people advancing at the same measured pace as before. Not rushing, not chasing, just coming, like a tide. She stood frozen for 3 heartbeats, caught between the known threat and the unknown one, then edged down 2 steps to peer inside. The basement was bigger than she'd expected, tall enough to stand in, the walls unfinished concrete veined with old moisture stains. The floor was covered in candles, dozens, maybe hundreds of them, stubs and pillars and tea lights, arranged in circles and spirals, their flames guttering in a faint draft. The air was thick with wax and something muskier and older, the smell of dust and damp earth and something faintly sweet that made her stomach turn. At the center of the floor, ringed by candles, were paper flyers and photographs spread out in a careful fan. Missing persons posters, faces of men and women and teenagers, and even a few children. Their eyes printed in grainy grayscale, smiling eternally above big block letters that said, "Missing and last seen near I-16. Jasmine recognized at least one of them from a true crime podcast she'd half listened to a year back. A local girl vanishing from a gas station, her car later found abandoned, no sign of a struggle. Now the flyer lay here, edges curled, spotted with old wax strips. On top of one stack of papers as if laid there recently, she saw her own face looking back at her. A cropped photo from social media, the one she used as a profile picture, printed hastily and taped to a blank sheet of paper with her name scrawled beneath. Next to it, taped separately, was a small lock of dark hair bound with a cheap elastic that looked exactly like the kind she used. Her skin went cold. No one had taken her picture at the rest stop. No one had asked her name. They'd had this ready. "See?" a voice said from behind, gentle and almost proud. "We've been expecting you." Jasmine spun and found the cashier halfway down the stairs, the symbol on his wrist gleaming with a faint sheen of sweat. Behind him, silhouetted in the doorway, the others waited, their shapes filling the frame like a living wall. Up close, their smiles looked more like baring of teeth. "What is this?" she managed, her voice a hoarse whisper. "What are you people?" The cashier tilted his head, considering his answer. "We're caretakers," he said at last. "The highway takes its due. People vanish out there all the time, drunks, runaways, unlucky ones. Years ago, this place was just where they stopped to rest. Now it's where they stop to pay what's owed. Some of us were chosen. Some of us volunteered. We make it neat. We make it meaningful. He gestured toward the ring of posters. You're not the first, Jasmine. You won't be the last. But what happens next? His smile sharpened. That changes everything. She didn't remember making the decision to bolt past him. 1 second she was frozen on the steps. The next she was ramming her shoulder into his chest, knocking him sideways into the candlelit room as she barreled up and out, shoving past grasping hands that slid along her arms and jacket but couldn't get a solid hold. Someone shouted. Someone laughed. Gravel slipped under her shoes as she sprinted for the parking lot, head down, vision tunneling. At the edge of the trees, she saw headlights swinging into the rest area. An enormous 18-wheeler rolling in slow, engine rumbling, the glow from its cab casting long shadows. Desperation put fresh strength in her legs. She waved both arms, screaming, not even sure what words were coming out. The truck squealed to a halt just shy of her. The driver's door creaking open to reveal a woman in her 50s with deep lines around her eyes and a suspicious squint. "You okay?" the driver called down. "You look like hell." Jasmine pointed back toward the building where the group had stopped at the edge of the lamplight, watching. A cluster of silhouettes with the glowing orange door behind them like the mouth of a furnace. "They cut my battery," she gasped. "They had my picture. There's a basement, candles, missing people, please. You have to get me out of here. They won't let me leave." The driver followed her trembling gesture, eyes narrowing as she took in the unmoving line of people. For a second, Jasmine thought she saw a flicker of recognition. Or maybe it was just the reflection of the lights in the driver's pupils. "Those folks?" the woman said finally, tone unreadable. "They look like they worked the night shift. You sure you're not just spun up from the road, honey?" It felt like having the ground drop out from under her. How could this woman not feel the wrongness radiating from the group? Not smell the metallic tang on the air? Not see how their bodies seemed too still, their faces too smooth? Behind the driver, the group took one synchronized step closer. Not enough to be a charge, just enough to close the circle another invisible notch. Jasmine latched onto the only lifeline she could see. "Please," she said, voice cracking. "I don't care if you believe me, just don't leave me here. Take me to the next town. I'll pay you, I'll ride on the floor, I don't care. Just don't make me stay." There was a long pause in which the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then the driver sighed, jerked her thumb toward the passenger side. "Get in," she said. "Lock the door. We'll let the cops sort it out down the line." Jasmine didn't wait for a second invitation. She scrambled up into the cab, slammed the door, and shoved the lock down with trembling fingers. As the truck pulled away, she dared one last look back over her shoulder. The people in the lot hadn't moved to stop them. They just watched. 11 dark shapes framed against the wash of sodium light and the building's flickering sign. The symbols on their skin catching the dim glow like little black suns. One of them raised a hand in a slow, almost courteous wave. She turned away and kept her eyes on the road ahead until the rest stop disappeared from the side mirror, and the darkness of the highway swallowed everything but the stripe of asphalt in the headlights. 45 minutes later, under the buzzing fluorescence of a Savannah police station, she laid it all out: the carved symbols, the sabotaged car, the bunker full of candles and missing people. The officers exchanged the kind of looks reserved for drunks and the mentally unwell, but to their credit, a patrol car still went out to check the area. One of them called back on the radio from the scene while Jasmine sat in a plastic chair hugging herself. "Place has been closed for years," his voice crackled over the speaker. "Graffiti everywhere, busted vending machines, no power. No basement either, far as I can tell, just a concrete slab. If there's a door, it's buried. No vehicles on site, no staff, just a bunch of old junk and raccoon tracks. They drove her home after that, chalking it up to heat, exhaustion, too much caffeine. Maybe something slipped into her drink at a previous stop. Her friends leaned toward the panic attack explanation, and Jasmine let them because it was easier than insisting on something that left her sounding unhinged. Alone in her apartment, though, she couldn't shake the images. Her own face on the floor surrounded by strangers' missing posters, the neat little lock of hair, the way those 11 people had moved like a single mind wearing different bodies. Weeks later, wondering if she'd hallucinated every second of it, she bought a cheap dash cam and finally worked up the nerve to check the footage from that night. There she was, clear as day, walking into a brightly lit rest stop bathroom that looked nothing like what the officer's body cam had captured later. Her video showed clean tiles, an intact mirror, walls unmarred by graffiti except for the repeating circle with 7 lines motif carved into the metal surfaces. The camera caught faces too when she ran panting back to the car. People she'd never met with the same sigil inked or cut into their flesh, turning slowly to watch her like sunflowers tracking the sun. The basement stairs hadn't been in the dashcam's field of view, but once she paused the frames and zoomed in on the glass door of the building, she could just make out that impossible orange glow bleeding up from below, reflected faintly in the glass. She brought the video to the police, but this time the report vanished into some higher drawer and no one called her back. Months later, scrolling through local news on a sleepless night, she saw a tiny headline about ownership change and renovations at an unnamed rest area on a state highway, complete with a photo of a fresh coat of paint on a familiar low concrete building. The article called it a much-needed upgrade to a neglected facility. The new logo, a stylized rising sun over a road, looked harmless at first glance until she traced the curve of the sun with her eyes and realized the rays were wrong. 7 lines instead of many, all emanating from a perfect circle. Since then, drivers on that stretch of County 441 and even further along I-16 have quietly added their own stories to late-night forums and shaky videos. Cars that die for no reason at that exit, phones that drop to 0 bars only in that parking lot, 2 clean bathrooms in otherwise filthy buildings, friendly employees with matching tiny tattoos, travelers who stop for a quick rest and somehow never make it to their destination. And every time Jasmine sees another missing person poster taped to a gas pump along that corridor, especially the ones whose last known location is en route between Atlanta and Savannah, she feels the phantom pressure of 11 pairs of eyes on her and wonders if that basement is filling up with more faces, more circles of candles, and whether some night when the road has worn her down enough to make her careless, she'll see that rest stop sign again and feel a pull she can't quite resist. Story 4, mile marker 223.7. David Park's hands were locked white-knuckled on the steering wheel as he realized he'd passed the same Texaco gas station for the 23rd time, the odometer ticking up another 30 miles each loop while his GPS cheerfully insisted he'd been making steady eastbound progress toward Seattle for hours. The sun frozen high in a sky that hadn't darkened once since noon. He'd only meant to take the scenic route home from his Bozeman conference. Highway 200 through Montana's endless pines and valleys, a quiet drive to unwind after 3 days of code reviews and bad coffee, filling up at that unremarkable Texaco near mile marker 223 with its flickering neon sign, and a cashier who barely glanced up from his phone. The first repeat had seemed like a joke. Same weathered pumps, same hand-painted open 24/7 banner, same dusty lot with a single rusted pickup parked crookedly by the air hose. But by the third pass, with the fuel gauge inexplicably holding steady at 3/4 full and his phone's clock refusing to advance past 2:17 p.m., a cold sweat broke across his back, the kind that made his shirt cling like a second skin. He pulled over that time, killed the engine and stepped out into air that felt too still, too heavy. The highway stretching identical in both directions with no traffic, no birds, no wind to rustle the roadside grass. And when he went inside to demand answers from the cashier, the man looked up with eyes that didn't blink and said, "You just left 10 minutes ago, same questions." Pointing to the security monitor where David's own face looped in grainy footage, entering the store over and over, the timestamps all reading 2:17 p.m. David's mind reeled. He checked the odometer before leaving the station the first time, 223 miles, and now it read 253, 283, 313, each reset dumping him back at the same point with the same fuel level. The same unchanging daylight, as if the road had folded in on itself like a Mobius strip designed to trap him in perpetual motion. He drove faster after that, pushing 80 through the straightaways, eyes glued to the mile markers whipping by, 224, 225, all the way to 252, convinced he'd broken free only for 223 to materialize again like a punchline he couldn't escape, the Texaco's lights buzzing mockingly in the corner of his vision. Panic set in properly around what felt like the 10th loop, his throat tight, breaths shallow, the car's AC blasting cold air that did nothing to cut the rising heat of claustrophobia. He tried the radio, flipping through static-filled channels that all dissolved into white noise or faint, distorted country tunes that looped the same verse endlessly, and his phone, once showing full bars, now displayed no service, with a battery percentage stuck at 87%. By the 15th pass, hallucinations started creeping in, or maybe they weren't hallucinations, just the road's way of toying with him. Shadows of other vehicles flickering at, the periphery gone when he turned his head, a hitchhiker thumbing a ride on the shoulder who vanished mid-stride, the faint outline of a deer that crossed the road ahead only to reappear crossing it behind him. He stopped again at the station, this time not going inside but circling the lot on foot, kicking at gravel that crunched identically under his boots, peering into the pickup's cab where a thermos sat half full of coffee that steamed as if freshly poured, though the truck's windows showed no fingerprints, no wear. The cashier watched him through the glass, mouth moving soundlessly, and when David finally met his gaze, the man's reflection in the window didn't match. Older, gaunt, with eyes that held a weary recognition, mouthing "turn back" over and over until David stumbled away, convinced the whole place was a diorama built to break him. Desperation turned to numb routine by the 20th loop. David methodically noting details to prove to himself he wasn't insane. The exact number of soda cans in the vending machine outside, 17, always 17, the faded bumper sticker on the pickup, Montana born, Montana proud, peeling at one corner. The way the mile marker sign at 223 leaned 3 degrees to the left, but nothing changed, and the sun's relentless glare started to feel like judgment, baking the illusion of progress into his skin. It was on the 22nd pass, engine humming steadily as he crested a low rise, that he finally saw something new. A blue sedan pulled crookedly onto the shoulder ahead, hazard lights blinking in lazy rhythm. A woman in her 30s standing beside it with arms wrapped around herself, waving frantically as his headlights swept over her. He slammed the brakes, gravel spraying, and she ran toward him before he'd even shifted into park, her face pale and streaked with tears, clothes rumpled as if she'd been wearing them for days. "Thank God," she gasped, yanking open the passenger door without asking. "You're real. You're not one of them. How long have you been here?" David stared, words failing him, until she slid inside and locked the door behind her. Her name Rachel, from Missoula, who'd taken the same highway for a weekend getaway and found herself circling the same 30-mile stretch since yesterday morning. Her own gas gauge frozen, her watch and phone both trapped in time. They compared stories in hushed, overlapping bursts. Her loop starting at a different landmark but converging here, his starting at the station, both noticing the subtle wrongness in the sky's color, the air's stillness. The way sound seemed muffled, as if the world beyond the highway was wrapped in cotton. Rachel had seen others too, she said, voice dropping to a whisper. A dusty van parked further down on her first loop, its driver a hollow-eyed man who wouldn't speak, just pointed mutely at the road ahead before vanishing when she circled back. A semi that appeared briefly on the opposite lane, its cab, empty but engine running, dissolving like mist when she tried to flag it. They drove together after that, her sedan trailing his, marking the reset points with scratches on a map app that refused to update, theorizing wildly. Magnetic anomaly, government experiment, stroke-induced delusion. Until on what felt like the 24th loop, Rachel shouted over the radio they'd rigged between cars, "Look at the sign! 223.7! David slowed, heart thudding, and there it was, wedged impossibly between 223 and 224, a weathered metal post bearing mile marker 223.7, the decimal etched with deliberate care as if mocking the integer logic of the highway system. No such marker existed on any map he'd checked, yet here it stood, rusted but recent, the ground around its base disturbed as if recently planted. They parked beside it, stepping out into air that hummed faintly like distant electricity, and circling the sign revealed faint carvings in the soil, concentric circles overlapping in a pattern that made David's eyes ache, and words scratched into the post's base. The gap widens at midnight, reverse to seal. Rachel's phone, which had been showing 4:17 a.m. for hours, suddenly ticked to 4:18. David's, still pinned at 2:17 p.m., stayed frozen. Time wasn't broken uniformly. It fractured per observer, stretching and compressing in personal bubbles. They waited there as hours blurred, the sun unmoving overhead while shadows failed to lengthen, sharing protein bars from David's glove box and trading increasingly desperate theories until Rachel's display hit 11:59 p.m. and David's lagged at 11:45, close enough to gamble. At her midnight, they fired engines and backed up the highway at precisely 30 miles per hour. The loop's length in reverse, the world warping around them, asphalt rippling like water, pines blurring into streaks, glimpses of other trapped vehicles materializing on the shoulders, some with skeletal figures slumped inside, others with frantic drivers waving from windows that fogged with impossible breath. The air thickened, pressing against the windshield like a living thing, and David caught flashes in his mirrors, faces peering from the back seat, hands pressing against glass from outside, whispers overlapping the engine's whine. But he kept his eyes forward or backward, counting down the reverse miles until the odometer spun backward to 223.7 again. The sign glowed then, unnaturally bright, the carved words pulsing. "You are free, but not all." Rachel's car vanished in a shimmer, her taillights winking out mid-reverse, leaving David alone with a sudden lurch as the world snapped back. Sun dipping toward horizon, fuel gauge plunging to half, phone buzzing with missed calls from work spanning 3 lost days. He drove forward without stopping, mile markers climbing normally now. 224, 225, until he hit civilization and pulled into a diner, hands shaking as he ordered coffee that tasted real. The waitress's smile mundane and fleeting. The lost time haunted him more than the loops. Colleagues assumed food poisoning or a breakdown, his boss docking pay for the unexplained absence. But David pored over forms late into nights, finding scattered posts from other Highway 200 drivers, weekend hikers missing shifts, truckers logging phantom miles, a family vacation that aged their photos but not their memories, all converging on that impossible decimal marker. Some claimed escape by reversing at personal midnights. Others spoke of staying, their accounts cutting off mid-sentence as if deleted by unseen hands. David avoided Montana roads after that, sticking to interstates with their numbered certainties, but sometimes on long drives when the odometer hits a familiar digit and the sun hangs too long. He swears he hears a faint CB static from his glovebox radio, a voice like his own murmuring coordinates to the next lost soul. Mile marker 223.7, the gap widens, reverse to seal. He wonders if Rachel made it out or if she's still circling, her midnight eternally deferred, and whether his escape was mercy or just another layer of the trap, broadcasting warnings from a limbo where time loops but never ends.